So what are we hearing here? Tell me your thoughts. Yeah. Blessed are the merciful, for they'll be shown mercy.
You'll be given it.
If you do it, you'll be given it. Okay?
So therefore, if you don't,
You won't. Huh? So free. Is this a do it or else verse for you?
no, not necessarily, but I believe that there is a level of you have to take the action to forgive others, be merciful to others, and the same way God was going to respond to you. Not all the time, because I mean, if He were to respond to us the way we respond to others, a lot of times we would be worse off than what we complain about a lot of times. So He has mercy beyond what we typically give a person, but He's saying that we should take the action of being merciful to others as well. Kind of like in the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us.
Okay. Someone.
I think this verse reminds me of a number of parables that Jesus gives. Like, for example, the one where the man is forgiven of his debts by his boss, but then he goes around and demands like repayment from like a friend or something, and ends up throwing him in jail. And he ends up getting also the same treatment, because even though he received forgiveness for his, he didn't show that to someone below him. So it reminds me of that. So it seems kind of that like you should do this because you should be treated in the same way, kind of like golden rule-ish. But
I like that golden rule-ish.
yeah.
Someone else? What does merciful mean? Giving grace?
You know, I was going to ask you about that. I was going to ask you in the context of perceiving it as sympathetic versus empathetic.
Do you have any thoughts? Which one of those, sympathetic or empathetic, might move you to action?
For me, empathy.
Do you see sympathetic as more pity?
Well, when someone just mentioned saying, you know, God being merciful, I wouldn't say pity in that particular realm as far as God and His interaction with us. So I would say sympathy is the separation of God on some level from us and Him being holy and us not, and on some level or another. But then human to human, I would say empathy, because I think you need to at least try to be in someone's place, or have some sort of a level of understanding to, I mean, you don't, there are clearly cases where we're never going to be, understand what one is going through. But, so that would be sympathy. But then empathy is if you can at least try and put yourself in the place of that person, and I guess be merciful. That's why I said it was a question, not a statement.
Yeah, I believe every time Jesus did, the scripture highlighted that Jesus was, he was touched in the spirit, or he was, he felt a deep passion for somebody. He moved into action. It caused him to do something. And I believe the same way, you know, if we're feeling for someone, it should cause us to doing something for that individual. It may not be something grand. It may be a simple gesture to show that we do understand. We can place ourselves in that person's situation or position. If it's a mere lifting up in prayer that we can do, or whatever else that we can do for that individual. as opposed to sympathy where you just feel bad for the person, but no, nothing happens.
Hmm.
I think it's like giving up the right to take action for like immediate justice, and not just like rubbing things off, but I guess prayerfully and like hoping that being received by ourselves, or like that realization of like the Father not carrying out immediate and swift justice on each of us, like is realized by the person that we're merciful to. Because otherwise we would just become passive and people just step on us and it is of no benefit to anybody.
And I think there's a humility there too, that you can't show mercy unless you know that, kind of go along with what everybody said, but like if you don't know you're a sinner, or if you have never received mercy, then it's going to be hard to give it if you don't so yeah. I thought that was, I was just kind of relating to some like personal like things that are going on right now too. It's like I think it's hard to forgive somebody if you don't know that you've been forgiven, you know, or I've never experienced that. So
In fact, going off of just what you said there, it's hard to give mercy if you don't know that you receive mercy yourself. I think crazy thing is that the church I was at last week, the pastor was speaking on this very topic also, and he brought out the fact that sometimes, like we'll go across, we'll meet someone, and they're very angry, you know, for whatever reason it may be, whatever transpired through their day, they're very angry. And maybe they had a quarrel with their spouse. Now their spouse had forgiven them, and while as they left the house, but they themselves do not feel like they've been truly forgiven. So when they get back home, they're still going to get it. So throughout the day, they're carrying that with them, and they just kind of react to other people in the very same manner, because they feel when I get home, it's going to be all chaos. But their spouse is already, you're forgiven. It's kind of like us holding on to anger or from something that happened to us years ago. We've been forgiven. I mean, even relating to Christ, we've been forgiven of certain things, but we continue to go back to those things because we truly feel within ourselves that we have not received full, being completely washed of those things. So, but it does take being accepting that you've been truly forgiven to be able to truly forgive somebody else and not hold on to it.
Can you show someone mercy if you don't really know them and if you're not in a relationship with them? Or is then that just, does that side then fall on the pity side? And can you show someone that true, deep, Christ-like mercy if you don't know them?
Yes, you can.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think especially like an example like when you do missions, and you know, a lot of times you're just going out there and you don't know these people, but the time that you're taking or the actions that you do, you know, depending on what you're doing, are merciful acts. Based on no prior relationship with them. But just simply having a heart for whatever their experience is.
And so I'd probably push back and say, okay, those are, since you brought up mission, and I'm like a mission guy, okay, so those would be in 100% merciful acts, right? So there's no question there. But maybe, I mean, can some people do merciful acts without really having that deep, merciful heart for that person?
Yes.
How? Tell me how.
I guess it's the way that you phrased it, the merciful act, as opposed to really having a merciful heart. They're two different, you know, two different things.
Mhm.
So,
I think that mercy comes out of obedience often. We're called to show mercy, we're called to social justice, we're called to show who we are in Christ. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I feel it, I want to do it. It's, you know, my job to do it or anything else. I do it out of obedience to Christ. And as I am obedient in that action, then I find that mercy. So that the mercy that I'm showing to someone else, I'm also blessed with mercy when I'm doing it out of obedience, because I start finding that sense of mercy.
But can that also become like an ingrained legalistic kind of way of being for some?
It can, but I think that the more you're seeking Christ in it, the less it's about
Sure.
legalism and
Right,
the more it is,
right,
yeah.
right.
So, I think some of it is from the attitude. I may go into it with an attitude of I'm doing this out of obedience, but if I'm doing it out of obedience for Christ, my hope is that it doesn't become legal, it becomes.
You'd be transforming it that
Right.
way.
Mhm.
So let me ask you a question. Let me go to the question out there that kind of comes off of this one is, what breaks your heart for God? Right, maybe for Nicole, obviously, social justice, fits in there. Right, but I think that if deep down, whatever it is that we are merciful for, will be called out of whatever it is that breaks your heart for God. Maybe in some ways, what you were saying earlier, right? I mean, it's kind of interesting. Someone could easily walk down Skid Row and not see a thing, and be completely unaffected. And he gets in this car and drives out to the valley, and the guy knocks on the window and says, "Hey, do you need a bag of oranges?" And for whatever reason, that breaks that guy's heart, right? And then, he goes to that point. We're not saying the guy's not merciful. We're not saying the guy's not a good guy, but his heart was broken for this particular thing. Talk about that for a couple of minutes. I mean, what does that mean? What breaks your heart for God?
I'm a bit of a multiculturalist. And apathy that people tend to have outside of their own culture, their own world, is just one of those things for me. For me, I just love people. It doesn't matter, the race or the culture, getting any caught up in all those types of things. But yeah, that's one of the things that like when you made the example, let's just say specifically oranges, we could make an example and say one is Latino and the people in Skid Row might be, I don't know, primarily, let's just say Caucasian or African American, and that doesn't hit them. But then when they see the person who is probably, coming from Mexico, working hard or something, then that connects. For me, I don't have those compartmentalized type of things like it's this person or that person. If I'm going to work in the community, I'm going to work with people of different ethnicities, and it's just me.
Whoever the community is.
Whoever the community is, that
Uh-huh.
kind of thing.
Oh. Someone else? What breaks your heart for God?
I know at times, like, what breaks a heart for God at times can be something that we've personally gone through, that He's been working in us through. And if it's maybe not having parents around, then sometimes you tend to gravitate to more of people who don't have the parents, and you want to take care of them. and you really develop a passion for that and want to go wholehearted with that. Not to say that God cannot use us in other ways or will not use us in other ways, but we tend to focus more on that aspect of it.
Okay. I know for me, Nori mentioned that I do missions in Mexico. I guess I could say I do missions, but really as one of my friends says, I'm really much more Mexican at this point than American thinking in how I approach stuff. But I've gone back and tried to figure out, like, when did that change come, and when did something become different, right? I mean, I was a lot like Nori. I was in a church here in Santa Monica as a youth pastor, and sometime around January of this one year, they said, Dave, you're heading up the annual Mexico trip, mission trip in April. And I said, well, that's interesting, because I had never heard about it. I was hired earlier in the year, and I knew nothing about this. And they said, yeah, you get everybody together, you take them down, you do missions work. Oh, okay. I've never been on a mission trip. They're like, what do you mean? Yeah, I've never been on a mission trip. You ever been to Mexico? Nope. Never been out, never, I went to the Bahamas once, does that count? I'm like, no. And so the guy said, he says, well, I'll train you. Oh, okay. He says, don't worry about it, it'll be easy. And so that was like all I heard until like the week before it was time to leave. And he said, okay, now we need to go shopping and buy all the food, because back then you had to buy all your food and water and stuff and take it down there. At least I think we did. Now, I'm guessing that now I probably could have negotiated that, but that wasn't the case. So we bought all this stuff, went down there, and it sucked. I mean, it was just horrible. Literally. Well, first of all, you got to understand, the guys in my youth group, I had 9 guys in my youth group, and then we had like 8 guys in the college group. Kevin was on that trip, but my guys all dressed in black and carried literally leather hard cased briefcases filled with cassette tapes for their Walkman of Two Live Crew, and the heaviest stuff that you could ever imagine, right? And they just went because it was a time to get away from family and everything. I think we had 3 or 4 fights during the week, and we're not talking like guys wrestling. We're talking like somebody breaks a bottle and comes after somebody.
Wow.
A guy's like working over here, and the next thing you see is one of those cinder block bricks flying at his head, from them. This was like our mission trip. We had a guy, I don't know what I was thinking, but I invited an old Mexican guy to come and eat lunch with us. I thought, well, I'd read something. This is like 20-something years ago. I'd read that this is like what you do on a mission trip. You invite locals to come and be around you. And so I did that. And they all made fun of him while he was sitting there at the table. Now, even if you don't speak the language, we know when people are making fun of us, right? You can just sense it. And so afterwards, myself and this other guy, we walked him back down to his house, and he brings us into the house, and he shows us his Bible, and of course his cross, and then points up there to the church, and you're figuring out, you're going, oh no, man. These guys just got done making fun of him for an hour, and now he's saying, this is basically where I received Christ, was in this church, and I come back, and I'm going, this just sucks. And I came back home, and Shelley said, well, how was that? So it was great. And I'm never going back. And I thanked God when I got back for that, right? That I would never have to go back. And so, it's just where I am now. But somewhere, about 5 years ago, I went into this little colonia outside of Oaxaca. And you got to understand, I mean, I'm in some rough areas sometimes, in some poor areas, but something about this particular spot, and it was 2006, and all the schools had been closed for months because the teachers were fighting for a raise. And when we say school, I mean, a building that's, has 4 walls of aluminum and a roof of aluminum and a dirt floor in a place that's 80 or 90 degrees, and, it's really cruddy. And I looked around in this village, and the local folks had asked us to do a vacation Bible school. And so we had some people doing that, and I thought, okay, there's maybe 1,000 people that live here, maybe. Right? Most of them don't have electricity, most of them don't have running water, A good chunk of them don't have, you know, a substantial roof. They just put cardboard up, you know, for their roofs on their house because they haven't been able to afford the cement for the top yet, and the schools stink. And I thought, well, let's just say that better than any Bible school in the entire history of the planet, right? We could give an invitation this week and 500 people would raise their hands and really mean it and decide to follow Jesus. And these become the 500 most committed people to Jesus that you've ever met, right? You know what? The next day they're still going to wake up and they're still going to be hungry and there's still not going to be a roof on their head and they're not going to have electricity and they're not going to have water, and something just snapped in me. And it just, you know, my heart broke in a way that it had never done before, because I think there comes a point when you really get to know people that you learn something that you didn't know before, and it goes from being acts of mercy to trying to live mercifully, and it's just brutal. You know, maybe that's what you're feeling, because I know, right? I mean, I've got 12 or 13 greenhouses we're going to put up in February, and you know what that means? It means 12 or 13 families are going to eat, and you know, 20,000 others aren't. But I would just tell you that somehow, and I don't know that, I know I have not done it, I have not figured this out. We can't solve all the problems, but like Holden Caulfield you know, out there in the field of rye, where people can't see, maybe we can catch some of them before they go off the cliff, and that's really what it comes down to. And when I look at, you know, this, blessed are the merciful, maybe for me, God showing me mercy is saying, it's okay, Dave, that you can't get to everybody.